All right, welcome back, everybody. Season 6 of Mind Over Music. I'm your host, Sean Ali Mosley. I'm so happy to be with everyone this evening. Tonight, we have the incredible, the brilliant Sophia Unver joining us today. She's running for Precinct 6, Justice of the Peace. She's such an amazing, dynamic person. I'm so happy to have her on the show. Sophia, thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Thanks so much for having me back, Sean. How are you?
Yeah. Oh, I'm doing great. I'm doing great. You are coming off of some incredible work from the community. You've been knocking on almost 4,000 doors, if I'm not mistaken. We've been seeing voter turnout kind of be a little up and down. I want to get into that a little bit, but how's the journey been so far?
Yeah, I feel like it's been forever, but also it's gone by so quickly. We're on, I think, wrapping up on day, let's see, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21. Wrapping up on day 7 of early voting.
Right.
But it's been an incredible experience. I mean, so many people are so grateful. Like you mentioned, we've knocked on over 4,000 doors. And I know people think like you do that, but that's like the heart of what this is all about. It's about real neighbors connecting with folks where they're at, and the amount of people who are just surprised that someone is taking the time to reach out to them and knock on their door is, it's amazing and beautiful at the same time, but it's also so sad because they're not expecting someone to reach
Right.
out to them and ask them, what's important to you, and also to ask them that I'd love to earn your vote. So it's been really wonderful.
Yeah, one of the things that the Justice of the Peace, I guess that role really does is it is your first conduit into, going from the community into legislation and social services and things of that sort. I think it's so important for us to know who our Justice of the Peace is, especially now learning about your role and how critical it is. You're dealing with everything from, getting access to food pantries to evictions. You're working truancies, how our education system is working or is failing our children. A lot of that kind of comes down to you and how we are able to help families manage the debt that they're in, that they don't get evicted and make a bad situation even worse for the entire community and put their safety on the line as well. Talk to us a little bit about, the people that you've met, the stories that you've heard, and how you believe that the Justice of the Peace is going to kind of propel the entire community forward with you at the helm.
Absolutely. I mean, like you mentioned, it's just a lot of day-to-day stories. And unfortunately, there is a lot of backlog of what realistically the county can't even get into
Right.
versus what is even worth getting into. So I've spoken to people who, maybe had a few traffic violations and didn't know that they could have, done like some type of a defensive driving course, or maybe they weren't offered that. And because of the nature of how it all went down, their license was revoked, and it's
Wow.
been revoked for many years. Now, I mean, in 2026, I mean, unfortunately, Texas is not a very public transit friendly state. How are we expecting people to get from and to work?
Right.
Right? How are we expecting people to even pick up their kids if they're sick at school? And, you have people who are wanting to work, who are able bodied, but they can't because their license is revoked. And so I think at some point we have to think about, you know, everyone must, and we, absolutely need to follow the law and the rules of what is legislated. But at what point are we over penalizing, over criminalizing folks? And is it actually, doing what it's supposed to do, which is, making sure that folks are following the law, but are we doing it to a degree that's actually just making things worse,
Right.
and impacting a family, impacting an individual's ability to just be able to be mobile within our society. And so I think there is a lot to do that a lot of folks don't think about when they think about justice of the peace. And there are a lot of stories of landlords who have had really terrible tenants, or tenants who've had really terrible landlords. And what I always like to say is there is not one, you know, in life, there is not one type of person who is a bad person, or there's not like one specific label of what makes a terrible um, terrible person. And so we're all trying to do the best as we can. And I want to make sure that, again, there's fairness, consistency in that fairness. But then there's also context of what is happening, um, what are the given situations, so that no one person is being labeled a villain before they even have access to that due process.
Yeah, I think the challenge that people have is there's a difference between having resources and being resourceful. And how are you
Yeah.
supposed to be resourceful if you don't even know what the resources are in the first place,
Yeah.
right? And then you get penalized for it. And so the thing is that one thing that I've learned from your role is making bad situations worse and then making worse situations impossible to get out of affects the community and reverberates around the quality of life. It revolves around safety, education, everything. It just, one bad situation where you just weren't aware of how to best handle it. The two things that you almost cannot afford to be in America in a capitalistic society is poor or sick, and it's ironic
Yeah.
because when you think about the one of the original creeds of the United States, which is give us your sick, give us your poor, right? We really needed to repopulate and create opportunities
Give
for
us
one another.
that, but then just don't be it once you get here, I guess.
Right. Once you get here, like, yeah, recover quick and get with it and start contributing to the economy. And so it's really difficult, but there is that dichotomy. And so I think your role is trying to balance both things at the same time and ensuring that communities aren't so impacted and affected because of certain decisions that are made, or that people were just not aware of the resources that were designed to help them not put themselves in a situation like this.
Absolutely. And, it's not even just what resources are available. A lot of folks don't necessarily understand legally what they can and can't do.
Mm.
And so, I mean, take one example. I mean, this is kind of, one I think most people can relate to. It's an 18-year-old, um, you know, we're talking about traffic. So he gets pulled over, comes before the justice of the peace, and, the justice of the peace can't legally offer advice, but is asking, how do you plead? And I mean, it's like, there's a ticket there, shows that he was speeding, so there's no disputing that. And he's just like, I
Mm.
plead guilty.
Mm.
And the 18-year-old is not thinking about, how does this impact my insurance claim?
Right.
The
Right.
18-year-old is not thinking about, what does that mean for like the next time I want to, you know, as I get older and maybe I get my first job, what does that look like for if I purchase a new car? What does that look like when I
Or
try to
yeah, what does
take out
that
a loan?
mean for my record? Yeah.
Then what
What
does
if
that
my
mean in my
employer wants
record?
to issue me a car and they see
Right,
that I
right. So there's
pled guilty
all
for
these
speeding?
things. Absolutely. There's all these impacts that individual's not thinking about. They're thinking about, I was speeding. That's correct. It's printed there. I plead that I did guilty. And so there is just this like, you're doing what you think is correct versus what other options are available to you, because you can say, again, you can offer Texas law, there is a bill that allows for a justice to offer community service related, uh, you know, penance, if you will,
Right, right,
in
right.
lieu of in lieu of hefty fines, because it can be just very difficult for folks to pay that off, or even just impossible. And so again, that 18-year-old is not thinking about like how this impacts my life. They're thinking about the moment. And so again, I think there are a lot of people, mediation is also a great resource, but a lot of people don't really understand what mediation is. And
Mm.
so they're looking to just get this over with and be done with it. But again, that impact, what does that look like if you are evicted? What does that do for your record? What does that mean when you then are wanting to find a new home because now you need to, but now this is on your record. And so it's not going to be very easy for you to then get a new place to live. And so again, most people don't think like that because they're dealing with a crisis at that moment. And when you're in crisis, you're not thinking long term. You're thinking, how do I fix this current situation I'm in?
Well,
And so I think there is.
yeah. Well, one other thing that I think about, is the innocence of it all, right? They're not trying to figure out how to game the system to ensure that they have a better outcome, right? They're saying, "Hey, look,
Yeah.
I'm guilty. the law is going to treat me fairly. I was honest about my plea, and hopefully the judge will have some mercy on me because I was honest. And I'm just an 18-year-old. I'm just getting my life started.
Yeah.
Hopefully he doesn't throw the book at me, or she doesn't throw the book at me. And that doesn't happen, right? It's like, okay, well, you pled guilty.
Right.
This is like, the standard of,
Right.
of yeah, what ends up happening to people who plead guilty for speeding, and it doesn't take into account, your specific situation and, what you might or might not have going on, in your life.
Right, exactly. And so I think again, there's that like, what do these words mean legally, and what do these words mean like in conversation? And
Yeah.
there is a very distinct difference. And so, the average person doesn't know. And what is crazy is that the Justice of the Peace Court is supposed to be a court where you do not have to have legal representation so that you can plead your case as an individual. But I also think that while that is very important, and that is the creation of why this court exists, I also think it's important to have access to free legal aid if and when you need it, so that you can have a little bit of counsel. Because again, if you understand what the situation is, what the terminology means, and you have someone who can sort of tell you what the impacts of those decisions are, you will be a little bit more informed.
Mm.
Um, we can't expect people to make informed decisions if they're not informed. And
Right.
so I think that's really important. And as we talk about, the changing, not just demographics, but the world that we live in today, Denton County is one of the fastest counties actually in the country.
Mm.
And JP6 deals with a quarter of the eviction cases for the entire county.
Wow.
So this seat has and can have a big impact for the local economy as well. And so there is an opportunity, I think, for someone in this seat to work collaboratively with other partners so that they can take a bigger role, and they can also offer those resources to folks who are being impacted in real time.
This is amazing. Yeah, let's break that down a little bit. I think we'll talk about education, and then we'll talk about the economy. How do you educate people who are in crisis, right? Kind of going back into that family, or that 18-year-old, whoever it might be, that's just trying to get through the next day. They're not spending time reading a brochure, right? They're not trying to figure out, how to, how to understand their rights, and, who knows if they can even chat GPT, hey, what are my legal rights, and even read that, right? How do you get through to these individuals that are the most exposed in society, the ones that are the most vulnerable? How do you create an educational effort to ensure that they are feeling safe, protected, or even seen by the law?
Absolutely. I think it's a lot about making sure that that information is accessible. So I know that there are some Justice of the Peace courts, both in Dallas and Denton County, that will have, you know, um, information present at the court. And so they've, again, worked with local nonprofits or other resources, and, shared that a packet is not something someone in crisis is going to go through realistically. It needs to be more concise. It needs to be like a one pager. I was at one Justice of the Peace Court, and they had like a link there, and I thought that was great. But then I thought, if there was a QR code, it would be just quicker for folks. And then I was talking to an older woman who said, well, I still like having my links. So it's like you can offer both, because you don't know who the
You're-
person is that's going to want that
Right.
information, right? You're
Consuming.
dealing, yeah, who's your consumer, right? And I think when I always think about what is the user experience here. And so if the user experience is like this is clunky, a lot of the language is very formal, like I don't even know what like, am I allowed to raise my hand? Am I allowed to turn around and ask someone? You don't know. And most people will just not ask a question there. So I think there is like an opportunity to educate, and I think there's an opportunity for also someone in this position to be out in the community where these communities are, um, to share. Let me tell you a little bit about what this means. Let me tell you about what this does. And I know that there are folks who do this. They meet with like citizens academies. They meet with different organizations, and I think as we deal with something like truancy court, I'll tell you, because I have kids in school, it is very confusing. Again, what does language mean, right? Excused, unexcused. to me and you sounds different than what the school board, because of the Texas legislature's funding, like what that means.
Mhm.
And so different words have different implications in different settings. And so explaining, I think, or sitting down with, like your local school boards and working through like, we're seeing an uptick in truancy in this age group, right? Whatever it may be, or this, is it more in elementary school? Where do we see it?
Yeah.
And sort of getting ahead of that. So, as we look at the start of the new year, we have orientations, how we make sure that we're sharing this information that, you miss this many days of school. What is that implication? Because in Texas, if you miss, if you're in your danger of truancy, you can face a fine of up to $500.
Yeah, it was interesting because you talked last time you were on the show about your truancy case where
Yeah.
you had no idea, and it had nothing to do with you wanting to skip school. It was more of a social situation that you were thinking through and
Yeah.
having a little bit of difficulty with, and the law is the law is the law, right? You, you
Yeah.
know you talked about knocking on 4,000 doors, which means you've gotten to know your neighbors. Talk to us about some of those experiences that you had. What do you think about our neighbors in North Texas now that you know so many more people? You've earned so many of their votes. How has that experience been for you?
Yeah. It's like you never know what you're going to get, to be
Mhm.
very honest.
Right.
And I
About the
say
chocolate.
that, yeah, yeah. Because like, for example, the thing is like your neighbors are people you go to the grocery store with. They're
Right.
folks that, if they have children, you might see them at the park or the local PTA. And what I've actually just seen is how small my world really is. Because once I start recognizing people, I'm like, I think I've not, or, I'll go somewhere and someone will say, hey, I think you knocked on my door. And
Right.
it's like the funniest thing. And I'm just like, and I'm in a situation that's completely different. But
Yeah.
I'm like, yes, hi. And then I'm just, like, thank you. And I might not always remember a name very well, but I can usually remember where I've met somebody. So I'm like, is your house on this side where that playground is? And
Yeah.
it's just really funny. But people bring, their own talents. I met a woman at, not through knocking on her door, but actually at like another, community rally gathering that was happening in the area. And I was like, I swear I've met this woman before. And then I just asked her, I was like, do you work at this doctor's office? Because I think like I go to that doctor's office, and it turned out that it was her.
Wow.
And, she had shared that she wanted to get involved. But it was tough for her to knock on doors, especially with it's randomly cold in Texas and in this area. And it just keeps getting like,
It was
we
a
just get
tough
really hard.
couple of weeks. Yeah. I feel
Yeah.
I should
Oh,
have been walking with you guys. It's like Super Bowl Sunday, and then it was freezing. Like,
yeah. No, no,
yeah,
no. Then we got the
the ice
snow, and then
storm.
now,
Yeah.
yeah, now it's like really windy. But she wanted to share something, and so she made these bracelets for us,
Cool.
and she
Yeah.
wanted to have, and they say Sophia JP, and they had the colors from like the branding of our campaign materials. And so, and I appreciate that, because that's what it's about. It's about community. It's about real people, and sometimes it'll be folks who are, we are knocking on doors, but I also want to meet people where they are, which
Mm.
means, folks are like near a rec center or a playground. I want to be respectful of where people are in their rest period, but also that's where people are having real conversations. And so, um, just recently, there was a dad that I was talking to, and I said, "Did you have that stroller?" And we were just talking about strollers, and we were talking about how different strollers have become in the last few years. And from that conversation, we talked about how much does change in a few years, and
Right.
how even like a stroller can logistically make getting in and out of the car harder or easier. And just like that, there are so many barriers that so many families face logistically with Justice of the Peace Court. Now, obviously, you have to like thread that, kind
Needle.
of needle, but it's something a lot of people can relate to. Like logistics, really can either make something harder or easier for folks. And I think that accessibility and affordability at the end of the day are logistics issues. And I think most people can relate to that.
Yeah, it's interesting to me because whenever I see people say, oh, that's not my issue, that's a corporate issue. Well, corporations are just a conglomerate of people, right?
Yeah.
Government is just regular humans. It's just us. It's our neighbors. It's not some special thing that,
Yeah.
people that don't, like you said, go to the same grocery stores, visit the same doctors, hang out with their kids at the same parks, go to the same schools. And so, the accessibility part here and the imagination of what we believe whenever I hear the dreaded words, I don't believe my vote counts, right? Like it doesn't matter anyway who I vote for because this person's probably going to, that level of hopelessness and just disregard for your own agency and what you can do to actually change things and contribute your ideas. It's something that we're really missing as a community. So I want to talk about voter turnout quickly, and then I want to turn it to the economy, and then we'll wrap up after that.
Just these light issues.
Just like quick, yeah, just 2 minutes. We got about 7 minutes to talk about some of these really important topics, or we can take a commercial break and come back if you want to do that.
Yeah, it's up to you. It's up to you.
Yeah, we'll do it. We'll do a little commercial break and then we'll come back to it. But yeah, let's talk quick. Well, yeah, okay, let's do that. We'll take a commercial break. We'll come back with part 2 with Miss Sophia Unver, Justice of the Peace, Precinct 6. Stay with us. We're going to be right back after this quick commercial message. Here we go.
You're listening to Radio Azad, where your voice matters. Entertain, inform,